Welcome to the Full Moon Film Buff, episode 84. We're going to talk about Howling 4, the original Nightmare from 1988. I watched this on Amazon Prime. I had not seen this before. We begin with a prominent crew and cast. The film was directed by John Howe and Clive Turner, who was uncredited. It was written by Gary Brandner, Clive Turner, and Freddie Rao, with effects makeup by Steve Johnston's XFX Incorporated. John Howe got his start in British television. He moved on to Hammer horror films before moving on to add more wholesome Disney family fare. He continued to work on horror movies for his entire career. I can't find out a lot about Clive Turner. He is a big part of the Howling franchise, writing, producing, and even acting in this film, as well as Howling 5 Rebirth and Howling New Moon Rising, which is the 7th movie in the series. He also directed part of this film and New Moon Rising, and he also edited New Moon Rising. Gary Brandner worked as an amateur boxer, bartender, surveyor, loan company investigator, advertising copywriter, and technical writer before turning to fiction writing. He's most well known for this trilogy of novels. Turns out, we have seen Steve Johnston's work before. Universal Monster films and the Hammer films inspired Johnston to become a special effects artist. Johnston's biggest influences are Jack Pierce, Dick Smith, and Rick Baker. While still attending high school, he met Baker and showed him his portfolio. Baker acknowledged Johnston's problem-solving talent and later helped him get a job with effects creator Rob Bottin. One of his first jobs was on The Howling, after which Baker hired Johnston as a special effects makeup crew member for the John Landis blockbuster An American Werewolf in London in 1981. His best-known creations include Slimer for Ghostbusters in 1984, Robin Williams' Robotics for Bicentennial Man in 1999, and Dr. Octopus's Arms for Spider-Man 2 in 2004. A personal favorite of mine he worked on is Big Trouble in Little China from 1986. For Innocent Blood in 1992, Johnston innovated contact lenses that could glow and change color on command without digital After Effects. They were Sierra, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, lenses coated with silicon glass and Scotch-Lite, so the colors would bounce back towards the camera when lights, such as those from a color wheel, were projected on them. Johnston is also an instructor at the Stan Winston School of Character Arts. The cast includes Romy Waithall as Marie, billed as Romy Windsor, Michael T. Weiss as Richard, Anthony Hamilton as Tom, Suzanne Severd as Janice, Lamia Derval as Eleanor, Norman Anstey as the sheriff. Michael Weiss's best-known role was as the star of the NBC show The Pretender, where he got to play more than 50 different versions of the character. This film was one of his first film roles. Anthony Hamilton's first career was as a professional ballet dancer. He moved on to modeling before becoming an actor. His highest profile role was certainly on the 1988 reboot of Mission Impossible. Suzanne Severd also started as a model. After her role in this film, she moved to Europe with her husband and continued her career there. Norman Anstey is an actor from South Africa. I'm damning this film with the lukewarm praise that it's fine. It's well made. But to me, it lacks energy. It wasn't compelling, not scary or exciting. The more I learned about its production and the conflicts and clashes between the producer, writer, and director, the more that listlessness makes sense to me. The film got pulled in too many directions. I don't think you need to go out of your way to see this film, but I also think you'll enjoy it if you do. So that's my recommendation. Now, The Howling from 1981 and The Howling 4, the original Nightmare, 7 years later, are both based on the same novel by Gary Brandner. Interestingly, Howling 4, the original Nightmare, is in many ways a much more faithful adaptation of the novel than the original was. For your information, I am reading the novels right now and will be doing a book special sometime later this summer. Writer and co-producer Clive Turner was originally going to direct, but when the financiers pulled out, he had to get veteran horror director John Howe to direct at the last minute with what money remained. In an interview with Fangoria magazine, Clive Turner said that he was disappointed with director John Howe, but that they ended up with a reasonable film. John Howe was a fan of Joe Dante's The Howling and is a horror movie aficionado, so he was eager to do a werewolf movie for the first time, but he was disappointed as well with the final result due to the changes made by Clive Turner when he reshot and re-edited the film. In an interview, Howe stated that Howling 4, the original Nightmare, is one of the few movies that he can't call his own. So let's cover the synopsis. Author Marie Adams hallucinates a nun before and during a meeting with her agent, Tom Billings. She has a vision of a wolf-like creature lunging from a fire and screams hysterically. Her doctor advises her husband Richard to get her away from the pressures of life. Richard locates a cottage in the small town of Drago, some hours from Los Angeles. Tom drives Marie there and flirts with her. I think he wants to be more than just her agent. He departs as soon as Richard appears. Marie inspects the cabin and declares it perfect. That night, while she and Richard make love, Marie is disturbed by howling in the woods. The next day, Marie and Richard explore Drago. They meet the mysterious Eleanor, a local artist who owns an antiques and knickknack store, and the Ormsteds, who manage the local general store. They also meet the local sheriff. That night, Marie dreams of wolves, of running through the woods, and of the nun again. Richard has to drive into LA for a meeting. Marie spends time chattering with Mrs. Ormsted, who tells her about the previous couple who occupied the cabin. They left without a word. Marie walks home through the woods when she sees the nun in her visions. Marie chases her, but it turns out to be Eleanor wearing a cloak. Eleanor points out a shortcut to the cottage. Marie discovers a cave and what's left of her poodle, Pierre. Something chases Marie home. Richard calms her down and checks outside. He sees nothing, including the dark figure that's obviously spying on them. The next morning, Marie witnesses an apparition of an elderly couple in her living room, warning her to go away. Marie invites Janice Hatch, who is on vacation and is a huge fan of Marie's writing, to talk. Marie mentions the Howling. After some hesitation, Janice confesses that she used to be a nun. Her closest friend, Sister Ruth, disappeared a year ago, only to be found in Drago, raving about the devil, a bell, and howling. After an illness, Ruth died without explaining what happened to her. Determined to discover the truth, Janice left the convent. Janice shows Marie a photograph of Sister Ruth. It is the nun from her visions. Marie assists a hiking couple. They tell her about a local landmark, a bell tower transported from Europe. On the way back to their camper van, they are lured off the trail and attacked, killed by a growling assailant. Meanwhile, Richard becomes frustrated with Marie's instability in visions. He buys a gun to help her feel safer. Mrs. Ormsted prevents Marie and Janice from investigating the bell tower. Marie learns the hikers abandoned their camper and suspects the worst. The priest in Twin Forks, the nearest town of any size, tells Marie and Janice that Sister Ruth was babbling, "We're all in fear," when he saw her. Marie has a vision of poltergeist activity. Richard teaches her to shoot. Richard is drawn magnetically to Eleanor and sleeps with her. Meanwhile, a wolf prowls around the cabin. Marie shoots it, and Eleanor screams. When Richard gets home, Marie almost shoots him. He investigates but finds nothing. Janice researches Drago and found a story about a werewolf. Marie reacts poorly to this mention of the supernatural. When she tells Richard what she has learned, he angrily dismisses her claims and goes for a walk. Eleanor waits for him. As the two get intimate, Eleanor transforms into a werewolf, bites Richard, and runs off. He stumbles back to the house and tells Marie he saw the werewolf. But later, after being examined by the doctor, he claims that he just fell. His wounds are almost healed. Janice researches exorcism. Tom checks on Marie, but Richard tosses him out. Marie is convinced that everything she's seen is part of her mental illness. Tom connects with Janice and they investigate. Sister Rich turns out to be the daughter of the old couple. Janice puts together that Sister Ruth was babbling, "Werewolves are here," and not "We're all in fear," as the priest assumed. A werewolf kills Tom as he heads home. The next night, Richard transforms into a werewolf as the villagers are revealed as Satan-worshipping werewolves. They all attack Marie. She escapes and replicates the storyline from the original folktale. Janice sacrifices herself, luring the inhabitants into the local church using its bell. Marie burns them alive, including Richard. The film ends with a burning werewolf lunging at Marie out of the fire, just as she had foretold in her visions. I've mixed feelings on the transformations. I want to start by acknowledging that FX artist Steve Johnson was disappointed in how the werewolf effects were utilized, feeling they looked nothing like what he and his team intended. In an interview, Johnson stated, "The producers wanted something new for the transformation, so we had the man melt into a big pool of ooze in several different stages. Then we zoom in on the pool and it forms into a wolf. But take a look at the edited film and I don't think that idea gets across, through no fault of our own." Here's the problem. I disagree with him. I felt like the idea came across crystal clear. It was a new and interesting idea for the transformation process. It was horrifying to watch the lycanthropy tear Richard apart and then put him back together again. That said, the actual makeup jobs were fairly basic, nothing memorable. Now, as the fourth film in the series, this movie resets the werewolf lore back to the core basics. These werewolves do live in a community. However, we know lycanthropy is an affliction. We see Richard get bit. We see him change. These werewolves are not strictly governed by the moon. They change at will as well. While mundane weapons can hurt them, they heal rapidly. Silver is never mentioned that I can remember, so we just don't know if they are susceptible to anything other than fire. Since silver is specifically mentioned in the novel and in the original film, I assume that they still are. The interesting question to me is why Marie is having visions. Why are ghosts warning her of the impending danger? So let's discuss that. There is a weird paradox at the heart of this film. Marie begins the film getting visions of the burning werewolf. The ghost of Sister Ruth tries to warn her, but those very hallucinations are what drive Marie and Richard to Drago, into the gaping maw of the werewolf clan. I suspect Sister Ruth wasn't attempting to protect Marie, but was rather trying to obtain justice and to stop the werewolves. I was reminded of the specter haunting David in An American Werewolf in London with a twist. The victims of the werewolves aren't haunting the killer. They haunt the potential victim, trying to save someone else, even if they could not save themselves. It makes me wonder whether Ruth or her parents experienced their own spiritual warnings. If not, why? And if they did, why did they fail to save themselves? I don't have any answers to those questions, just something I'll let rattle around in the back of my brain and see if a future werewolf movie shakes some ideas loose. Now, in the canon of the Howling films, few plot threads have proven as consistent as the seduction and conversion of the male lead by a seductively predatory female werewolf. First depicted in the 1981 original and revisited in the sequel, this plot point comes straight out of the original novel. This is a metaphor for the taboo thrills of infidelity and the intoxicating dangers of uninhibited female sexuality to monogamy. On the surface, the narrative follows a straightforward trajectory of temptation and subjugation. The female werewolf, an overtly sexualized vision of feminine power and lust, seductively sinks metaphorical and literal fangs into the heroine's unwitting husband. Through a calculated campaign of primal charm and smoldering animal magnetism, she lures the hapless man into her embrace, overriding his sensibilities. But it's what follows that cements this trope as a resonant archetype of sexual anxiety. Once seduced, the husband doesn't just stray emotionally or physically, but he physiologically transforms into a werewolf himself. In submitting to the she-wolf's invitation, he sheds his domesticated masculine identity, surrendering to his primal impulses as an allegory for the erosion of civilized male restraint. No longer is he the steadfast pillar of fidelity and rational patriarchal control. He is beholden to the untamed lusts, irrevocably turned by the dominant, insatiable feminine force that he could not resist. Now, on a deeper level, the seduction and conversion symbolize the intrinsic sexual power wielded by the archetypal, alluring, desirable female form when freed of social restrictions. By her very predatory nature, the she-wolf embodies the monogamous fear of female sexuality, an atavistic threat to marital sanctity and civilized order. For the hapless heroine who loses her mate to this literal man-eating temptress, the symbolic sting goes even deeper, a primal violation not just of her marriage vows, but of her perceived ownership over her husband's identity as a human male. His irrevocable conversion is the ultimate romantic insult, stripping away his domesticated self and replacing it with a selfish creature of pure animalistic id. At its core, this motif represents the symbolic dethroning of masculine identity itself in the face of untamed feminine desire. No more is the male lead's sense of self-possession and restraint enough to preserve his selfhood. Instead, the predations of the voracious supernatural feminine force reduces him to a husk, remade into an extension of her feral impulses. It's a delectable subversion of the deviant psychological subtext. So, if you like lycanthropes, like, share, and subscribe. Contribute your thoughts and additional observations in the comments below. Let me know what I missed or what you noticed. Next, I plan on discussing The Rider of the Skulls from 1965. Keep your eye on the moon, a silver bullet in the chamber, and we'll see you back here next episode.